Just a note before we get started. This is the third episode in a 3-part series. If you haven't heard the first 2 episodes, go back and listen. What you're about to hear will make more sense if you do. Also, a content warning. This episode contains descriptions of the aftermath of gun violence.
The details of the story are a bit, some of them I just don't remember. But I do remember going with friends to pick someone up. And for the most part, just remember seeing a flash. I woke up and I was in Harborview. And my mom was next to me and she said, "Don't look down. What do you do? The first thing you do like this," not realizing that I've got a trach tube in. So when I bent that's why she said not to bend down, because I would put pressure on that trach tube and I began to cough. Immediately, my mouth is hurting because I'm wired shut also.
This is Northwest Reports. I'm Maliha Sayed.
And I'm Sarah Bernard. That was Paul Carter III, recalling the moment he woke up at Harborview Medical Center after being shot in the face. You might remember his name from the last episode. We introduced him as the first violence intervention specialist for Harborview's Violence Intervention and Prevention Program.
After the shooting in 2015, Paul struggled to eat, drink, and speak, spending about 2 months recovering at the hospital. As he started to recover, he began volunteering at Harborview to help other people who experienced trauma.
I was like using sick time and vacation time to volunteer, to come up to the hospital and volunteer, because it was an intricate part of my recovery. And then I was approached by Dr. Neer and Dr. Bolger about a program that was similar to what I was doing that was going to be beginning, but it was centered around people who had been affected by gunfire.
He signed on, and since then he's been helping other patients find their footing after being shot.
In this episode, we'll hear from Paul and his colleague, Tarrell Harrison Jr., about the work they're doing in Harborview's Violence Intervention and Prevention Program and what it means. We'll also hear from Mark Rivers of Community Passageways, one of the organizations that Harborview partners with to help patients readjust to their lives after they leave the hospital.
Together, these 3 paint a picture of the broader community-wide effort to support patients and families affected by gun violence, and to make sure that the support doesn't stop, even if their physical injuries are healed.
My name is Paul Carter III, Paul James Carter III. A lot of people know me as PC. Family call me PJ. I am one half of Washington State's first violence intervention prevention specialist team at Harborview Medical Center. I've been in this role for going on 3 years.
We asked Paul to talk about his work in Harborview's gun violence intervention program. But first, we wanted to hear about what it was like to be on the other side as a patient who had been shot himself.
During my time at Harborview as a patient, there were more down times than good times. Not knowing what's going to be next, not being able to eat or drink for a long period of time, not knowing how severe this nerve damage is that I have, and if I'm even going to be able to swallow. One of the biggest takeaways from my recovery was returning to the hospital after being a trauma patient, just to attend my appointments. And I had otolaryngology, physical therapy, general surgery, cranial maxillofacial cranial surgery, all these different appointments, along with trauma counseling, which can be a lot in 1 week sometimes. And the counseling was actually twice a week. I've got vocal cord paralysis. Part of my lung was removed. Still like some nerve pain, a little bit of nerve damage in my face, but it's minimal now. One of the biggest things was like my esophagus was ripped in half. So they had to really go and reattach my esophagus. And when it began, started to bleed. And that's what got to my lungs. It caused an infection, so they had to remove part of my lung.
So Paul understands the ways that gun violence can impact a person's life long after they leave the hospital. And he continues to see that today, all the time, through his work at Harborview. As we mentioned in the last episode, the program is set up to help patients deal with everything under the sun, from getting transportation to the hospital to navigating lost wages. Paul is one of 2 violence intervention specialists who connect with patients.
And I'm not even gonna lie, we bicker about things in the office, like like a 50-year-old marriage couple. And it's all because we're just really extremely passionate about the work we do.
That's Tarrell Harrison Jr., the program's other violence intervention specialist. Tarrell has known Paul since high school.
And the good thing about like having that relationship with him is that we can show that vulnerability. I don't feel like I have to be a macho man and like take everything to the chin and be strong every day. Like if I have to tell him like, bro, I need a minute, I need to go outside. Even if I got to shed a tear in front of him and be like, bro, or get a hug, like whatever the case may be, like that's what we've been for each other.
Needless to say, this can be painful, vulnerable work. Tarrell and Paul help patients and families navigate what may likely be the most traumatic event of their lives.
I mean, I think like the first day I worked was probably the hardest day because it was such an eye opener. Being introduced to like the ICU and like watching a 13-year-old get shot and like not make it. Seeing the process of how doctors have to like explain that to parents and like, I don't know.
And some of these cases hit very close to home.
I try to get my mindset of like, all right, play ball, it's time to go, But it's also like a personal side of like, even though I'm doing the work, I'm not that far removed from it personally. And sometimes it's a fear factor of like, is anybody gonna be on this list that I know, that I love? It has happened, I've have come in on a Monday morning and been like, hold on, this is a family member. It can hit so close to home that it's almost scary to almost like open up your computer and see your referrals. Like it's like you just don't know who's gonna be on the other end, so.
And that can be really hard. But these connections can also help Tarrell build relationships with other patients.
I kind of use that to my advantage to be able to get in and kind of like be able to gauge and like needs assessments. Like, what would you want me to do to help support you? And it's a little bit more easier to engage with them.
The experiences and perspectives that both Tarrell and Paul bring to the table may be especially valuable in helping patients who are skeptical of the medical system let their guard down.
I heard patients say they don't care about me. They just think I'm just some gangbanger that got shot. They're just trying to patch me up and throw me out the door. And I'm like, no, that's why they send me to come talk to you, engage and see, if there's things that you might need, of how we can give you resources to kind of like give you a fresh start and like give you something to, hold on to while you're trying to recover and build, whatever you want to build after this. So, and I really feel like the way I gauge with patients and me being able to build that relationship, it kind of puts a lot of patients at ease of like, you know what, somebody does care. Like he comes and he makes sure that I'm good every day. Like he's just, a friendly face and a support system. So I feel like I'm doing my part, reestablishing a relationship between hospital and community, but also just showing people that people do care. And like this is something that maybe you might not feel the whole world is trying to solve, but we're trying to solve.
Here's a quick recap of how the program works. One of the violence intervention specialists connects with a patient to assess their needs. And this can mean getting people access to crime victims' compensation so they can pay their medical bills, or getting them hooked up with an EBT card. But it can also mean figuring out the next steps for someone who has longer-term things on their mind, like wanting to pursue a GED or trying to get out of an unsafe living situation, the kinds of things that might help them escape a cycle of violence.
And Paul says this program isn't just for patients. It's for their loved ones, too.
My mom her car is shot. Her son is hit, but she's too traumatized to go to work right now. We're going to do crime victims compensation for you because you were a victim in this incident. We are going to refer you to Harborview Abuse and Trauma Center, and we're going to make sure that all bases are covered.
Most people Paul and Tarrell work with are wrestling with a lot of emotions, and this can strain communication with nurses and doctors. Tarrell says this is where he and Paul can serve as the middlemen, advocating for patients and getting a better understanding of their needs.
I had a patient, who's under the age of 25, and to me, his little brother, and I just remember him crying and saying, like, bro, you're the only one that visits me every day, and I think, like, that's huge. Somebody who's trying to, and he's a spinal cord patient as well, and just, like, not seeing your kids, not being able to walk again, having all this medication you have to take, and getting up every 3 or 4 hours because doctors are coming in, want to take vitals, and shift change, and now you're not really sleeping that well. You're dealing with all that on your own. And then, you have somebody that can kind of, like, advocate for you. Like, if they can relate to me, like, you know what, man, like, I've been kind of snappy today. I've been yelling, woo, 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 whatever. Man, but I don't be meaning it. And me being able to, like, go to, a nurse, be like, hey, I heard he snapped on you today. His mom said he was going to visit. She didn't. Somebody said they was going to bring the kids up to visit with him. He hasn't seen his kids in 2 weeks. Like, give him a little grace. You know what I mean? He's going through some stuff that we probably don't know about. Like, you can't find in the chart. That kind of, like, I've seen nurses like, oh, okay, like, that's what he's dealing with, and then go in there and approach him different.
And sometimes the job of a violence intervention specialist is just spending time with patients.
There's been times when patients didn't want to talk, but they wanted me to just sit there with them. Sat there and just not even talk, just be there. We do things like we engage, like, with, like, games. Like, I'm known as the Connect Four King. I'm walking with the Connect Four out in the open. I'm like, let's go. And it's that type of engagement. I had a patient where she was like, something that I would really miss is Mad Libs. And so I told my supervisor ordered a Mad Lib book, and we sat and did Mad Libs for 3 days.
Sometimes the job really is that simple, but it can be important to make these connections even if they start small, because it might open a door to really talk to a patient who could be starting to rethink their entire life.
Just watching somebody come in through ICU and just watching their journey of just sharing, like, what they've been through and experienced in their life and kind of how it got to this point and just how they want to change. Watching them take the steps of, like, coming an outpatient and them sharing, like, I'm making all my appointments, I'm going to physical therapy, I'm looking for work, I moved, or, just, get those highlights of, like, a promise, and just seeing a patient just from ground zero, from almost having the worst outcome ever to, like, having a refreshed outlook on life and how they live their life now is, like, probably the most rewarding, you know what I mean?
And Tarrell believes in the program's potential to affect patients' lives even after they leave the hospital's care.
If we can help somebody, like, get wage losses or crime victim or help with rent or, some type of case management where they get support once they're out of our program, somebody might come out and be like, well, shoot, I might have to go do X, Y, and Z because, like, I'm still short on rent even though I'm injured. But that's taken care of, so that stress is not on the forefront of their brain. It's taken care of. So, like, now they don't have to go into, like, survival mode. You know what I mean? They can be like, all right, cool. Well, like, damn, the social worker helped me with that, and, like, T helped me with that. He's checking in on me every day or every week, and the resource navigator helped me find a new job or helped me find a way to navigate my current job or whatever the case may be. Like, I do think, like, that helps with what's going back into the world.
When he first started working in this role, Tarrell was skeptical about the prevention part of the
I
program.
was like, violence intervention, prevention. I said, what are we doing to prevent this? Like, what are we doing? And then I'm gradually, like, seeing the work and, like, the product that is going back out into the world is like, oh, that's the prevention piece. That love that they get that shortens the percentage of them going out there and doing something to either be back in a hospital, be in a grave, or put somebody else in the hospital or put somebody else in the grave. Believe me, man, there's some family members that are on fire. And I hear the comments. I hear what people want to do. I hear that anger. And to be able to be like, look, man, I understand you don't like that. I understand you don't like the situation you're in, and you're probably angry, whatever the case may be. Like, let's focus on taking care of what's in front of us. Somebody might still get out and be like, I don't care. Like, I got to go handle what I need to go handle. But then there's also people that might go out there and be like, you know what, I'm done, bro. Like, you know, whatever. I'm taking this as a blessing that I survived this, and, you know, I'm using this as a wake-up call. Who's to say if they didn't have what our program, you know, offered them, like, they might be going back into the world with just a whole bunch of pent-up anger and just, you know, back to square one. You know what I mean? So, like, I think that's the hidden prevention work that we're doing.
As we've mentioned, a major goal of the program is to think about patients in the long term.
Because I think one of the worst things we can do in this work is tell a patient that we're going to do X thing for them and not follow through on that, right? And leave them hanging.
Again, Dr. Deepa Kanera, founder and director of the program.
And we've been really sort of mindful of really trying to prevent that from happening and making sure that, you know, our group is communicating with the community-based organizations that we work with and really trying to make sure individual patients are being talked about and are getting what they need as best as we can provide it.
A lot of our work is intervention.
And Laura Johnson, program manager.
And, you know, we're at the hospitals, so we're seeing people after the injury has already taken place. And so we are doing the intervention work and referring to community-based organizations for the ongoing support and restoration piece.
The hospital places a lot of emphasis on connecting people with community partners to make sure that patients' needs are still getting addressed after they're discharged. And the type of support that these groups offer can also range from family restoration and help with a resume to getting people resources to install wheelchair ramps in their homes.
I'm Mark Rivers. I'm the newly deputy director at Community Passageways. I'm over our community safety teams, so our community safety ambassadors, and then our critical incident response team. So I am the leader of those two programs.
Community Passageways is a nonprofit based in Seattle that's dedicated to keeping youth away from incarceration. It's been around since 2017, and like Harborview, is part of the Regional Peacekeepers Collective, which Dr. Nair mentioned in the last episode. It's also one of the organizations that Harborview's program connects patients with to help them return to and hopefully improve their lives after they leave the hospital.
Like Paul and Tarrell, Mark has seen gun violence up close.
Yeah, I've had a few friends that have been, victims of gun violence. One that I was actually there for and witnessed and, held his hand as he died. And so, yeah, super important to me just because it's a real thing. Like I've experienced it. And as well as like in our wild 20s here in Seattle, it was crazy around here. So being at so many shootings myself and then almost being shot myself, by the grace of God, I wasn't. Started a fight and, yeah, I almost could have been a victim myself. And, having that epiphany moment where it's like, if I no longer exist, like, who takes care of my daughter, And so, that's the message that I always want to pass, which is, man, we gotta do what we gotta do in order to stay alive and stay free. If I had went to jail because I was, on the other end and pulled the trigger, like, who takes care of her? Like, who supports my family? And so it's just, it's about being at peace and giving yourself a chance to grow as a person. A 30-second mistake can cost us the rest of our life.
Now, at Community Passageways, Mark wants to make sure other people have that chance to grow and move through the trauma of gun violence, including through his organization's partnership with Harborview.
I think it takes the whole ecosystem in order for us to be truly be effective. How it kind of works is once there's a gunshot victim, they come to the hospital, they have case managers that go and connect with the family, and the family says yay or nay that either they want support or not. And because they know what we do, they connect them to us.
And then often Mark and his colleagues' work is a true extension of the work that Paul and Tarrell do. helping people find everything from transportation to food, especially as or after they're leaving the hospital. And a lot of the support they offer is to families.
And we have a department, family restoration, which we go in and we support that whole family. Not just the gunshot victim, but if mom needs groceries, like we're going to provide that so she can take care of her, her child. Even there was a time where the dog needed resources, and we were able to provide some resources for their dog. But dog's part of family too. Like that's the real like nuts and bolts of it, is just being able to support that gunshot victim, like in them getting out the hospital and rebuilding their life.
That's the big picture part of Harborview's violence intervention and prevention program. Making sure that people aren't left to pick up the pieces on their own. That warm handoff that Dr. Nera talked about. It can really take a village.
And the hospital can only do so much, right? But then to have a partner that says, hey, this is this family, this is what they need, and then them to say, hey, this is community, this is what they can help with. And before they leave, connecting with them, having a plan in place, and then like really supporting them so that they never have to come back there as a victim again.
I asked Mark who is affected by gun violence in our region.
Everybody. What happens to one person happens to us all. When you turn on the news in the morning, you're going to feel a way when you hear that a 13-year-old was just shot out in the Harborview Mall.
A 16-year-old is charged as an adult in the shooting death of a teenage girl at the mall.
And you have to digest that for the day, right? Or you hear on I-5, somebody was shot on the freeway.
Shooting spree that terrorized drivers up and down I-5 Monday night. Investigators say the number of victims continues to increase.
Like just you turning on the news, like that may have happened on I-5, but you turning on the news now affects you. And now you're either called to action or like your emotions are provoked off of that. Or young people hearing people in their community talk about it, and now just overhearing that has you concerned or worried about your kid doing something just as simple as getting on the bus and get from one place to another. So I think it affects us all.
It affects us all. Everyone we talked to for this series, everyone told us that.
This is the problem of others. It can't happen to me. That is what we get wrong.
Like Dr. Arbabi.
It can happen to everyone. We should look at it as if it's our own family.
And Laura Johnson.
Whatever the larger impact and ripple of an injury like a gunshot wound or the trauma that comes with it is, I don't think we fully recognize how much that impacts us as a community, us as, a society.
And Dr. Nera.
It's sometimes easy to, when you don't see this problem and interact with it, think of this as a problem that doesn't affect you. This is a problem that affects a lot of people in the United States, a lot of communities, a lot of young individuals, and I think it's all of our problem. And I think that we need to really think about it that way and approach it that way and really sort of commit to trying to change the narrative on this.
When the U.S. Surgeon General put out a national advisory in June, officially declaring gun violence a public health crisis,
first time the Office of the Surgeon General has focused on firearm violence,
he included a data point that stuck with a lot of people. More than half of all adults in the country report that they or a family member have experienced a firearm-related incident.
That over 50% of Americans are themselves have been impacted by a firearm injury or have had a family member or a friend who have.
And that's just direct experience. There are also all these indirect impacts that everyone we talk to argues we all feel. And so, one program, one hospital, a handful of people working on a very big problem. It's not much in the scheme of things.
No one knows the right way to do this. No one knows what the right way to evaluate a program is or how to set it up is. And there probably isn't a right way for every place, right? It's not the same right way.
But one thing feels pretty certain. This is something that medical professionals and medical institutions, in partnership with community organizations, are focusing on.
I think trauma centers are more and more aware that they need to be working on this in some way.
And the whole country is seeing gun violence more and more as a health issue.
We've been talking about this for a long time as a public health issue, and I think that's how we have to frame it.
This, again, is Dr. Bolter, Chief of Surgery at Harborview.
I think the challenge we have with gun violence is that it can be a very polarizing political topic, right? And there are people who feel really strongly about the role of guns in our society. So we have these polarizing camps, and then nothing gets done. So what we've tried to advocate for is, let's take it out of the political realm. Let's talk about it as a public health problem. And let's say, how can we focus on two things that both sides can probably agree on? How do we work to understand and address the root causes of violence, right? And that's all the work of the community that we're trying to do. And then how can we make gun ownership as safe as possible for those who own firearms and for those who don't? I think regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, you can say, well, yeah, I could work on that, right?
Progress, of course, is subjective. There are a lot of reasons we find ourselves with this amount of gun violence here in Washington and across the country. And there are probably a lot of solutions, too. But one thing everyone knows, and everyone we spoke to told us, is change doesn't happen overnight.
The truth is like, there's a true element of like humanness that has to go into this work. And oftentimes you're trying to help them first unpack, their trauma and the things that happened to them. And then you're trying to help them rebuild. And just like a house, like building from just pouring the foundation and, building up, it takes a certain time. But if you have to demolish that thing first, and then you have to relay the foundation, right? It's gonna take a little longer.
Thanks for listening to First Response by Northwest Reports. This is the final episode in the series, but stay tuned for another series on a different topic in a few months. This episode was reported and produced by me, Maliha Sayed, and Sarah Bernard. The story editor was Ryan Famuliner. Our executive producer is Sarah Menzies. You can subscribe to Northwest Reports wherever you listen, and whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. Also, if you would like to support the work we do at Cascade PBS, whether it's our lineup of podcasts, the video docuseries we stream every week, or the in-depth reporting we deliver every day, go to cascadepbs.org/membership. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive complete access to the on-demand programming of Cascade PBS. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit cascadepbs.org. That's also where you'll find First Response. Northwest Reports is a product of Cascade PBS. I'm Maliha Sayed. We'll be back soon with another episode.